We are one day away from perhaps the most consequential election in the United States history, at least during my lifetime. We are facing the election that has been really cutthroat, has had a ton of plot twists, including 2 assassination attempts and the current president stepping down and not seeking re-election. And some of you reached out to me asking me to host an expert so we can discuss the upcoming election. And I did reach out to a few of them. A lot of them said that they wouldn't be doing any appearances before the election due to their own reasons. And so I thought I just wanted to have a solo episode, which is due, where I distill some of the biggest themes, ideas, and things that I'm keeping an eye on this upcoming election. On both fronts, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, Democrat and Republican. It seemed as though when Kamala Harris was announced as president, there wasn't really any momentum on her side. It didn't seem that the shift from Biden to Harris improved the Democrats' outlook in terms of winning the election, improving their odds. Of course, this was due to several reasons. The biggest one was that Joe Biden was starting to be seen as no longer fit for office, and he was left out of the race due to age concerns. And we saw that really strikingly so during the first presidential election, where Joe Biden seemed that he wasn't really there. And I've been calling it for almost a year that I would see Joe Biden stepping down. Some of my previous guests said that this was not possible, but I had a hunch. And when this happened, a lot of rumors started surrounding the shift, the transition from an election without Joe Biden. And of course, the most obvious candidate was Kamala Harris, the vice president. And then when it was announced, a lot of controversy happened because she didn't really win the election. She was nominated as the replacement, but almost automatically it seemed very off. And a lot of voters and experts started questioning her experience as being on paper being strong, but in the real sense, in practice, wasn't really as strong. It seemed quite as though she wasn't there really to become president, and it looked as though this was just a replacement to just make something happen. But Kamala Harris wasn't seen as really fit. And then something changed during the second US presidential election, now between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, when they faced each other. And Donald Trump this time around wasn't really as sharp as the first time. He made comments that really backfired onto him, including the Haitian immigrants saying that they would eat the dogs and eat the cats of families, and other comments that really didn't answer the question that was put in place by the panelists. Seemed very weaved, seemed very tangential, and didn't answer the question directly. On the other hand, the debating itself also revealed quite a few things, at least on my perspective. It didn't seem that it was an equal stage for both debaters, for both presidential candidates. It looked as though Donald Trump was being fact-checked quite frequently versus Kamala Harris and all of her comments. It seemed that both presidential candidates made incorrect statements, incorrect ideas. At least one that comes to mind from Kamala Harris's campaign during the debate was that there were no US troops anywhere right now fighting any fights across the world. And it was very funny because many US troops were watching the debate and recorded that statement and then said, then who are we? What are we then? Like, what are you saying? And so both candidates had their own fair share of statements that had to be fact-checked by both panelists. And a lot of them, it just looked like the panelists were in favor of Kamala Harris and just vetted and just drilled down on Donald Trump's ideas more. And this was also a red flag. But that's where it started to be evident that the Harris campaign gained momentum. And a lot of polls, including one of the most accurate ones that at least I keep an eye on because there is money on the line, is Polymarket. And Polymarket started to shift into a wide advantage for Trump and then just narrowing down to almost 50-50 and even moving in favor of Kamala Harris after the debate. And that's where the race became very, very tight. And it was started to be seen that it was leaning towards a Harris victory. And keep in mind Donald Trump was shot and he survived 2 assassination attempts. But besides that, historically speaking, when a candidate or a president gets shot or there's an attempt on them, they gain a ton of support. But that also started to be seen as losing steam. But then all of a sudden, Kamala Harris stopped doing interviews, stopped doing appearances that would be challenging of her policies, and stopped providing any meaningful positions in terms of her policies. In fact, a lot of experts have claimed that Kamala Harris changed and flopped her policies almost 10 times or more, including her stance on the border, her stance on immigration, her stance on Israel. And then that's where voters started questioning if Harris was for something rather than just against Donald Trump. And it's a very crucial point here because Biden and Harris were aligned as a team. She was the vice president of Biden, and so she was part of the decision-making table. She was part of the situation room when situations unfolded. And then the Harris campaign started to distance themselves, separate themselves from the administration, the Biden administration. And when she was probed time and time again in terms of, were you part of this decision? Did you speak with Biden on this? What about this particular situation? How did it unfold? Did you see Biden as being fit for office up until the point where he stepped down? And she praised, rightfully so, because she was part of the administration, and she said that she was fit for it. And so it would be weird if she would say otherwise. But at the same time, she was trying to separate herself, creating her own policies. But at the end of the day, her policies in practice were the ones we saw in the past 3 years. She has claimed responsibility and credit for many of the decisions that now are going to be shown in the screen now. And she wasn't, at the end of the day, really able to distance herself from the administration. It wouldn't make any sense. So it started to be seen as more of a talking point rather than something with substance. It is safe to say that both candidates made a ton of mistakes along the way. Harris started to doing these mistakes more recently, and voters started catching on those. And now that it happened, in hindsight, it wasn't clear before the fact, but now that it happened, the Donald Trump podcast with Joe Rogan was also a breakthrough moment on the campaign. So much so that a lot of people are demanding that Harris goes into the podcast because this platform in itself provided a glimpse into a 3-hour conversation with a presidential candidate, something that is unseen in big networks such as CNN or Fox. There isn't really a 3-hour show where they can just provide their perspectives on several issues in 3 hours in a conversation. It's very easy to maintain, I wouldn't say a facade, but maintain a posture for 10 minutes on an interview, but try to do that in 3 hours. You start disarming yourself. And we saw that with Donald Trump. For the 3 hours, he was himself, whether you like it or not. And it started to be seen as a test for candidates to be genuine and being themselves. For 3 hours, it's very hard to keep that posture, keep that facade if you have one as a candidate. And also, funny enough, the McDonald's appearance by Donald Trump also made an impact on the election. And Harris hasn't joined Joe Rogan, where it's actually one of the most important platforms to reach independent voters or indecisive voters, young voters as well. And Harris asked Joe Rogan to meet her, to fly to her, rather than going to his studio. And that in itself is just a bad sign. Joe Rogan is a staple in terms of doing podcasts in his own studio. And it's sort of like you cannot not go to his studio to record. He hasn't done it in at least up until he moved into the new studio. So all of this, in other words, up until this point, is just more of the sentiment rather than the substance in terms of policies for both candidates. And the policies themselves, all of you up until this point should have known or have looked into what the policies are for each candidate. So I'm not going to go really deep into those. I'm going to go and discuss the biggest ones. What I would say in terms of what it seems with Donald Trump, we might see an attempt to decrease conflicts as his approach to negotiating and brokering deals has been effective throughout his entire career. That's something he's proud of and something he says quite a lot of times. I know how to make this, let's say the Ukraine-Russia war, or the Israel war end. I know what to say. And he hasn't shared the step-by-step process on what it would look like because it would break the deal, so to say, but it's something that he's proud of. And the implication here is that we would see a dip in conflict. And he does say that he maintains a strong relationship with the leaders that are currently facing a war like Ukraine, Russia, and Israel. And he knows how to push those buttons, quote unquote, to make, or at least attempt to make the war end. When it comes to Harris, it seems that it will be a continuation on Biden's approach, trying to de-escalate the situations, but supporting very forcefully one side over the other. Meaning that it does give the impression that Harris will double down on her support to Ukraine, which might increase tensions with Russia, rather than decrease them. And with Israel, it doesn't seem that she has taken a clear position on stopping the war, at least in the Democratic Party. Voters who wave Hamas or Hezbollah flags and praise them, which in itself should be seen as a red flag because they're a terrorist organization. But it doesn't seem as though the war would be closer to finishing with Harris as the new president, at least with the support of the US, should she get elected. And in terms of the border, well, the position is quite clear under Trump. Trump will shut it down. At least that's the policy that he's sharing with us. And Harris, while under the Biden administration, hasn't done that. In the past 3 years of the Harris administration, I think almost 11.9 million people have crossed the wall, have crossed the border. And I think under Trump was about 3.9 million or 4. So in practice, not in theory, not in campaign mode, Harris hasn't really worked to solve the border issue, even though she has started campaigning, saying that she will have a strong stance on the US border. And that's one of the biggest concerns of the US voters. And this talking point by the Harris administration is in itself something that looks to be taken from Trump's campaign, not Kamala Harris's. When it comes to the economy, moving on, one thing that it's worth saying is that the economy right now, as you'll see on the graph, under the Biden administration looks very strong. And it hasn't really caught voters' attention, at least the ones who haven't decided who to vote for. Since it's not an attractive topic to say that the economy is strong, it doesn't catch our eyes. But when someone says inflation has been high, inflation is high, recession is looming, that's a talking point we all want to hear and rally from. We have to give credit to the Biden-Harris administration because the economy has improved or looks steady enough, even though we saw the increase of inflation and prices throughout and the cost of living. And right now it does seem that the economy keeps being strong and employment is high, so that's a point for them. And so those three big issues are the three most crucial ones that I think the election will play down to: foreign policy, immigration crisis, and the economy. And there are so many others that we can discuss, but again, this is not the right time to do that since most of you, or those of you who haven't made your mind, are currently researching them. There are so many other topics that will influence the election, but again, this may not be the best time to break those down, as most of you have already made your mind, most probably, since the election is tomorrow. But this election is perhaps one of the most consequential because it seems that at least the team that Donald Trump is building for his cabinet, or people who will chime into the administration, are extremely intriguing and exciting, including the alliance with Robert Kennedy Jr., who ran as a Democrat, then became an independent, and then moved into Donald Trump's side. So that talks about bipartisanship, talks about alliances more than across the aisle, but also it includes Elon Musk, probably the most important public figure and innovator of our lifetime. And if it doesn't excite you that Donald Trump will support innovators like Elon Musk, that's a tough thing. And it's just a very easy thing to sell that Elon Musk would be a part of the future of the administration in some shape or form. And also it includes Tulsi Gabbard and those who are really on the cutting edge of innovating and creating prosperity for society. And when it comes to Kamala Harris, political figures including Barack Obama, John Kerry, Mark Cuban, James Murdoch, a lot of other celebrities, Beyonce, Ariana Grande, Magic Johnson, Stephen Curry, a lot of big names also support the Harris administration. So both campaigns have strong endorsements from both sides, and it's a matter of preference in terms of who do you align more in terms of a vision for the future. At the end of the day, I see this election coming out in two ways. That's the way I see it, and I might be completely wrong. It's either a very tight victory by Kamala Harris, a very tight one, or a landslide by Trump. That's at least how I see the momentum going. And I could be, again, very wrong, but that's how it looks on my perspective. I'm going to interrupt myself really quickly just to say that, of course, this episode also stemmed from the interest on the YouTube community, on the YouTube channel of True Conversations, where many of you helped and participated in answering my polls, asking if the election were to happen today, who would you vote for? And a lot of the data that I received was that overwhelmingly many of you believe that Trump will win by a wide margin, which was also interesting to see and also made my decision in terms of how I think the election would play out. It doesn't seem as though Harris has an overall general support. She does have, of course, for obvious reasons, the support of "I will vote Democrat until I die" Americans. But in terms of campaign, in terms of policy, in terms of momentum, it does seem that Donald Trump is on the minds of most voters for two reasons. One of them, the concern of him winning, and that would be the anti-Trump voters, not the pro-Democrat voters, pro-Harris voters. They are just voters who don't want to see Donald Trump for the next 4 years and are questioning if he would be able to deliver on his campaign promises. And the main issue that I see with the Harris campaign overall, at least when she started beginning campaigning up until now, is that she has campaigned for that very reason, being anti-Trump, being against Donald Trump's policies, stance, personality, you name it. But they haven't really emphasized what they are really in favor of. What is their vision of the future? And that in itself has alienated a lot of Democrat voters because it doesn't seem to be a clear grasp on what her policy truly is. And so the messaging, at least what trickles down, isn't what she is for, but rather what she is against. And so with that, this concludes the solo episode on the presidential election happening tomorrow. Of course, this is nothing other than just a take on the interviews that I've done in the past year, hosting several experts, not only in terms of the presidential election, but also on foreign policy, on the economy, on science and on technology, and also the own research that I've done and the own evaluation that I've done for the upcoming election. And again, like I said before, it's either a landslide by Donald Trump or a very tight victory by Kamala Harris. With that, I would love to hear your thoughts. Of course, politics nowadays can get very messy and have destroyed relationships, friendships, even relationships with family members. So please share your thoughts, but keep it civil. I'm always open to hearing different perspectives, especially now that I've said that perhaps it's a controversy that either Harris will win by a very tight margin or Trump by a huge landslide. And it might as well be very controversial, or other points that I've done so far in terms of the policy or perspective on how the campaign unfolded. And I would also love to hear your own thoughts or your own take on the election, the respective campaigns, their policies, and what draws you to each one. And so with that, I thank you for watching, and go out and vote tomorrow. It is essential that we do vote. It is essential that we participate, to keep it civil, in the sense that we are all voting in terms of what we wish will be the best path for the future, not only for us, but also for the future of our children. So don't alienate people. They're doing the same as you are. They're voting for their own vision of the future, their own definition of prosperity. Don't say that people are garbage. Don't say that one side is better than the other. On the other hand, let's just praise all of us who are engaging in this essential civic duty. All of us are coming from a place of limited, imperfect information, and all of us are seeking to build a future that's better for all of us and our loved ones. So hopefully, even though this election might become one of the most controversial, consequential, crucial elections we've lived and witnessed, I'm hoping that it turns the page from division enraged and makes us more unified. But that only starts when we engage in a more unified and more civil and more respectful approach to politics, and when we go out and exercise our duty and our right to vote. So thank you for watching. I hope to hear from you, and I wish you the best in this upcoming election and in the future.